Okay, so think about it. Like, the really big ideas, the ones that have shaped how our world works, we're going deep on one of those
Yeah.
today. Adam Smith is The Wealth of Nations.
Okay, so we're talking, this isn't just like an old book, right?
No, this is foundational.
Foundational.
Yeah. It changed how we understand economies, and you'd be surprised, I think, how many of the core ideas from this book are still around today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for anyone who's ever wanted to kind of get a shortcut to understanding the bedrock principles of modern economics, this is it.
Yeah.
Diving into the Wealth of Nations,
What's the cheat sheet?
it is. It's a cheat sheet to some incredibly influential ideas.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing. We've really tried to distill like what's most important in this massive book so you can get a solid understanding. You don't have to take like months off to read it.
All right.
We're going to unpack it.
That's right. We're your guides to the essential arguments, highlighting why they've kind of resonated for centuries. And, I think they continue to shape how we think today.
Yeah. So who was this Adam Smith? Our sources don't have a ton of personal details about the guy,
Right.
but what really matters for our purposes for this deep dive is that he wrote this game-changing book.
Exactly. I mean, our focus really is on the work itself and the impact that it had, just a seismic impact on the development of how we think about economics.
Huge impact.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And so what was his mission with The Wealth of Nations? Why did he write this? Well, in his words, he set out to inquire into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations.
So pretty straightforward aim.
Yeah, pretty direct, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a pretty big, pretty deep question.
Oh, yeah, it's a deceptively deep question.
Yeah.
He was trying to get to the heart of what makes some countries just flourish economically while others, struggle. What are those factors?
Exactly, yeah. And, a big part of what he was doing in this book is he was pushing back against a really popular idea at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was this idea that national wealth was all about, like, how much gold and silver
Okay,
you could stockpile. Like, that was it.
I see.
Right. He actually says he wants to examine a system of political economy that represents national wealth as consisting in the abundance and national poverty in the scarcity of gold and silver.
Right.
He even says that he's going to get into this more in book 4.
Yeah, that right there, that tells you that Smith had a very different vision
Yeah.
of what constituted a nation's wealth.
Yeah, totally. So he also believed really strongly that perfect liberty, essentially, letting people act freely in the economy, was the most effective way to create the biggest amount of goods and services possible.
Makes sense.
He mentions this when he's discussing the French economists of his day.
Yes, he saw a direct connection between people being able to make their own choices in the economy and how prosperous a nation could be as a whole, resources being used efficiently.
Exactly.
Uh,
Okay, so The Wealth of Nations is a long book. It's a big book. But for this deep dive, we're going to zero in on book 1.
Okay, book 1, this is where he lays out like the foundation,
Yeah.
all the building blocks, like it's the groundwork for his whole argument.
Right.
It's where he introduces a lot of his like really well-known concepts.
Exactly. So to give you all a roadmap, book 1 is organized into 11 chapters, and they are Chapter 1 of the Division of Labor, Chapter 2, of the principle which gives occasion to the division of labor, Chapter 3, that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market, Chapter 4, of the origin and use of money, Chapter 5, of the real and nominal price of commodities, or of their price in labor and their price in money, Chapter 6, of the component parts of the price of commodities, Chapter 7, of the natural and market price of commodities, Chapter 8, of the wages of labor, Chapter 9, of the profits of stock, Chapter 10, of wages and profit in the different employments of labor and stock, and then finally, Chapter 11, of the rent of land.
Wow, that's comprehensive
It's a lot. It's
right off the bat.
but it's all right there.
Yeah, and as we go through them, you'll see how each one kind of builds on the last.
Yeah.
And you can really see how Smith's ideas about how economies work, how he constructs that understanding.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into it. So the first few chapters, as you just heard, they're all about this idea of the division of labor. This is a big one, right?
Oh, yeah.
This seems like a core idea for Smith, almost like this is the engine of economic growth.
Absolutely. He argues that it's the single most important thing
Wow.
when it comes to boosting productivity, like more than anything else. That's what makes the difference.
Okay, so how does he How does he make that case?
He contrasts what he calls civilized and thriving nations, which, produce way more, even if not everyone's working, with what he calls savage nations, where almost everyone is working all the time, but there's just widespread poverty.
Wow, that's a pretty stark contrast.
It is.
So he's not just saying that more work equals more stuff. He's saying that how we organize work, this specialization is what makes all the difference. He actually says that in these advanced societies, though a great number of people do not labor at all,
Right.
the output is still way higher.
It is.
It really makes you think about all the specialized jobs that we have today.
Oh, absolutely. Just think about a factory assembly line, right?
Right.
Each worker focusing on one tiny part of the whole process.
Yeah.
I mean, that leads to much higher output than if everyone was trying to build like the whole product by themselves. That's division of labor in action.
That's it right there. So what's the driving force behind this then? This division of labor? I mean, is it some sort of like top-down plan?
Well, it's interesting because Smith actually suggests that it comes from something much more basic.
Okay.
It's just this natural human propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another.
Okay.
So basically, it's our desire to trade that leads us to specialize.
Got it.
We get good at something, then we exchange it with other people for what they're good at. It's like, built into us.
So it's not about someone in charge saying, you do this and you do this. It's more like it emerges organically from this human desire to trade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Complexity and efficiency can emerge from something, as basic as our desire to trade. Not necessarily because someone designed it that way.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this natural, like, human desire to trade, and that leads us down this path of specialization, which then, like, fuels this whole economic engine.
Right.
It's a pretty simple idea, but it's powerful.
It is, and it's profound. But he also points out a key constraint on all of this, which is that, the division of labor, how far you can take it, it's limited by, how big the market is.
Okay.
So, like, think about it. In a tiny village,
Yeah.
there's not enough people. There might not be enough demand to keep a highly specialized, like, pin maker in business.
Right. Right.
But if you're in a huge city, well, then you've got a way bigger market, and that allows for way more specialization.
Yeah, totally. If you can only sell your product to a few people, you're not going to specialize in just one tiny thing. But if you have a huge market, then you can really, really specialize. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we got this crucial idea of productivity, how we organize our work. Now, in chapter 4, Smith moves on to money. So why does money enter the picture here?
Well, money, according to Smith, it comes about as a solution.
To a problem.
Yeah, it's a practical solution to a really inefficient system.
Okay.
And that system is barter.
Barter.
Yeah, so imagine you've got a bunch of extra apples and you want to trade them for bread, right?
Okay.
Well, you have to find someone who not only has bread but also wants apples.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like this
Like a double coincidence?
yeah, a double coincidence of wants, he calls it. And it can be a real obstacle to getting things done. Money, on the other hand, solves this problem because everybody accepts it.
Yeah, it's like this common language.
It is. It's a universally accepted medium of exchange, so it greases the wheels. It just makes transactions so much smoother.
So it's like economic lubricant.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
And he goes into the history of money, too, explaining how, way back when they had trouble weighing precious metals accurately and figuring out if they were pure or not.
Right, right.
And so this is how we got coinage. The stamp on a coin, it was basically a way to guarantee its weight and its fineness, like an official seal of approval.
Right. It's interesting to think about, the names of those old coins. They often reflected, how much metal was actually in them, like the Romanaz or Pondo, the English pound sterling,
Oh, right.
the French livre. It's a connection we don't really have today with with our money.
No, we don't. I mean, back then it was a much more tangible link, a physical link to their value.
Right.
But then he brings up this trend
Okay.
throughout history, and it's kind of troubling. And it's this idea of what he calls debasement of coinage.
Okay.
Where princes and sovereign states would reduce the amount of precious metal in coins,
Oh, wow.
but they would keep the face value the same.
So it's like sneaky inflation.
It is. It's like an early form of governments trying to manage their debts, but they often did it at the expense of their people.
Right. It's kind of sobering to think about, something as seemingly stable as currency being manipulated throughout history.
Oh, absolutely. And he points out, that Roman as it was eventually reduced to just a tiny fraction of its original value.
Wow.
And even the English pound and penny, they shrank significantly over the centuries.
Yeah, yeah. He says that this practice always benefited debtors, people who owed money, while hurting creditors, the people who lent the money.
Right.
And it often led to, big shifts in wealth, economic instability.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've got division of labor and we've got money. What's next in book 1?
Well, in chapter 5, he introduces this really important distinction
Okay.
between what he calls the real price of goods and the nominal price.
Okay, so break that down for us.
So the real price, he defines it as the amount of labor that something can command.
Okay.
So like how much work went into making it. And then the nominal price is just the number, like how much money you pay for it.
Okay.
It's price in terms of money.
So the real price is about like the actual human effort behind a thing, and the nominal price is just the numbers on the price tag.
That's it. And for Smith, the real price, it's a much more stable measure of value
I see.
over time. Like the amount of work it takes to make something, that's probably going to stay relatively constant, right?
Right.
Compared to the value of like a
Yeah.
particular currency,
Mm.
which can fluctuate a lot.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, grain is grain.
Exactly.
Whether it's, a silver dollar or a gold coin.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. So then in chapter 6, he goes even deeper. He breaks down the component parts of a commodity's price. So what's he saying here? Like, what are the fundamental things that make up the price that we pay for stuff?
Well, according to Smith, the price of anything, when you get down to it, can be broken into 3 parts.
Okay.
The rent of the land, the wages of the labor, and the profits of stock.
Okay. Profits of stock. And we might call that capital today, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like land, labor, and capital.
Classic factors of production.
Yeah. Okay. So anytime you buy something, you're paying for all 3 of those things. You're contributing to the income of the landowner,
Right.
the workers, and, whoever owns the capital or the stock.
The business owner, right?
The business owner. Exactly.
It's like a fundamental accounting of the economy.
Yeah.
Like, what are all the different pieces?
Yeah. Yeah. And then he takes this idea even further, right? He doesn't just stop with individual products.
No, he goes bigger. He says the price of everything a country produces in a whole year.
Wow.
That also comes down to these same 3 parts.
Wow.
And they're distributed among the population as these types of income, rent, wages, and profit.
Okay, so it's like this really fundamental framework for understanding how the economy works. Okay. Chapter 7. We come across this idea of natural price and market price. This sounds like where supply and demand come in.
Yeah, exactly. So Smith, he says that the natural price, it's like this central price that the market price is always kind of moving around.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
like an average.
Yeah, think of it as a baseline, like the basic cost to make something,
Right, okay.
plus like a normal rate of rent, wages, and profit, for that specific place and time.
Got it.
But the market price, that's what we see, when we go to the store. Right?
Yeah.
That can be different.
So why is it different? Why does that happen?
Well, the market price is determined mainly by what he calls effectual demand. And what that means, it's not just about how many people want something, it's about how many people want it and are willing to pay the natural price for it.
Okay.
That's the key. The market price can also be affected by, unpredictable stuff like a sudden event or a natural disaster or even like government policies.
Okay, so anything that throws off that balance.
Exactly. Anything that interferes with the usual flow of supply and demand.
Yeah.
Like think about the latest, I don't know, smartphone or something.
Yeah. Okay.
If everyone wants it and everyone's willing to pay that natural price, which is the cost to make it plus a decent profit,
Yeah.
then boom, demand is high. And the market price might even go higher than that natural price, at least for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if the price gets too high, well, then fewer people are going to buy it.
Right.
And then the market price will start to fall back down.
Right. Back down towards that average, that natural price.
Exactly.
Okay. So what happens when that market price is like way higher than that natural price?
Right.
Do producers just like kick back, relax, and enjoy all that extra profit?
Well, what Smith says is that when that happens, producers are going to want to make more
Okay.
of whatever it is to take advantage of those high prices. But that increased competition, that's going to eventually push the market price back down towards the natural price. But he also points out something kind of interesting, which is that, those who are benefiting from those high prices, they often try to keep it quiet
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they don't want a bunch of competitors jumping in.
Right, right.
It's like, they found a gold mine and they
Yeah.
want to keep it to themselves.
Keep it secret. Okay, so it's like this, he's almost describing this self-regulating system,
Right.
right?
It is. It is.
Like even without someone, some authority telling people what to do, it's like the market itself will adjust to get back to that natural price.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. That's pretty cool. Okay, so Chapter 8 focuses on the wages of labor. So, what are the factors that Smith thought were important in deciding how much workers get paid?
Well, he put it to a few things. There's the overall demand for labor in the economy, right?
Right.
So, like, how many jobs are out there?
Okay.
There's the price of, essential goods like food, what he calls provisions. And so, like, how much does it cost to just live?
Okay.
And then there's just the general cost of raising a family.
Okay.
So those are all kind of tied together. And the basic idea is that, when there are more jobs than workers, wages go up because employers are competing for people.
Supply and demand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He also points out some interesting differences between wages in different places.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He said wages in London were often higher than in the countryside in, England and Scotland,
So,
even though the price of, like, basic necessities might not have been that different.
so why is that?
He makes this really clever point. He says that man is, of all sorts of luggage, the most difficult to be transported.
What does he mean by that?
Basically, what he means is that people are less mobile than goods.
Okay, so it's easier to move stuff around.
It is.
Total.
It's easier and cheaper to, like, ship goods to where they can be sold for a higher price than it is to move people to where wages are higher.
Right. So if you live in the countryside, you can't just easily pick up and move to London to get that higher pay.
Exactly. And that helps explain why wage differences can stick around longer than differences in prices for commodities.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like there's this friction, right?
There is.
In people moving around.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. Okay. Chapter 9 turns to the profits of stock, which is, what we generally think of as the returns on investments.
Right.
So how does he separate profit from wages?
Well, he's very clear that the profits from stock are not the same thing as the wages of a particular sort of labor, the labor of inspection and direction.
Okay.
So someone might manage a business, they might work super hard,
Yeah.
But the profit that they earn, that's not just a higher form of payment for their work.
Right.
It's a return on the money they've invested in the business, the capital they've put at risk.
Got it. Got it. So it's not just about effort.
Right.
It's about ownership.
It is. It's about ownership of capital.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. So what then determines how much profit someone makes?
Smith argues that it's generally tied to the value of the capital that they're using in their business.
Okay.
He uses an example of two manufacturers.
Okay.
They both have the same number of workers, but one has invested way more capital.
Okay.
Even if they're both putting in the same amount of effort to manage the business,
Yeah.
the one who invested more, they're going to make way more profit overall
Okay.
because their return is proportional to how much they've invested.
So it's about how much skin in the game.
Yeah, it is. It's about the return on that investment itself.
Okay. That makes sense. All right, Chapter X then goes into wages and profit in different employments of labor and stock. So did Smith think that all jobs and all investments would eventually pay the same?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
He said that, like, within a particular area,
Okay.
the pros and cons of different jobs and investments, they kind of tend to even out over time. Assuming, and this is a big assumption, assuming people can move between jobs freely and money can flow to the most profitable businesses without a lot of barriers.
Right, right. Okay.
Like, if one job pays way more, well, then more people are going to try to get that job.
Right.
And then the advantage will eventually shrink as more people compete for it.
Yeah, makes sense. But I mean, we know that doesn't always happen in real life.
Right.
Right? Like things aren't always perfectly equal. So what were some of the barriers that he identified, that Smith identified to this balancing act?
Well, he points to things like, apprenticeship rules and these exclusive guilds or corporations that, made it hard to get into certain trades.
Okay.
He gave the example of linen and silk weaving. The skills were pretty similar.
Yeah.
But there were all these rules and regulations that made it really hard to switch between them.
Okay.
So that kept wages artificially different between those two jobs.
Got it. And then there are the settlement laws and certificates that he talks about. Can you explain what those were supposed to do and how they affected the labor market?
Yeah, so these were basically like policies that were meant to stop poor people from moving around too much
Oh, okay.
so they wouldn't become a burden on local communities like, the parishes.
Okay.
Settlement laws made it really hard to move to a new town unless you could prove that you could support yourself.
Okay.
And these certificates were kind of like a guarantee from your home parish that they would help you out financially if you ended up in trouble.
Okay, so it's like this document saying, yeah, if they can't pay their bills, we got them.
Exactly. It was supposed to like limit people's mobility so they wouldn't become a burden elsewhere.
Right, but then Smith argued that these policies actually ended up hurting the labor market in the long run.
Right, because it prevented those wages from naturally equalizing between different regions.
Got it, got it. Okay, so even back then there were these well-intentioned laws that ended up having these unintended consequences.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Finally, we get to chapter 11, which is all about the rent of land. So, how does rent fit into Smith's big picture of the economy?
So Smith basically explains that rent is what's left over from the value of whatever you produce on that land,
Okay.
after you pay the wages for the people who worked on it and the normal profit for the farmer who's using the land.
Okay.
This is kind of like a residual.
Okay, so the landlord gets what's left over after the farmers and workers get their share.
Yeah, in a simplified way, yeah. He also makes the observation that the rent and the profit that you get from, like, more fancy or expensive crops,
Yeah.
they're usually determined by the rent and profit you can get from more basic crops like corn or pasture.
Okay.
Unless, there's a very limited amount of land that can grow those fancy crops.
Right, right. If it's like a rare thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. He also talks about how, improvements in farming techniques,
Okay.
like the introduction of new crops like clover or turnips,
Okay.
could change the price of, like, meat.
Okay, so new technologies and new crops could actually shift those prices.
Yeah, they could. Like these new crops, they made farming more productive, so there was more livestock, and that made meat cheaper.
Okay, yeah.
He also talks about government policies, like rules about exporting wool or letting wool be imported without any taxes, how those could make the price of wool go down artificially.
Okay.
That's an example of how government interventions can create unnatural results in markets.
Right. If you tinker with the market, things are going to shift.
Yeah, there are going to be consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so book one really lays out this whole big picture.
it does.
We've got everything from, why some nations are more productive than others to how prices are formed to how different groups in society make money.
Absolutely. It's the foundation, it's the groundwork for all his later arguments about how countries actually get rich.
Right. Okay, so let's sum it up here. If someone's listening to this, what are the key takeaways from book one?
Okay, so the biggies from book one,
Okay.
division of labor, super important.
Yeah.
It drives productivity. Money. We need money to make exchange happen smoothly. Prices are made up of rent, wages, and profit.
Right.
And there's this dynamic between natural and market prices that's always being pushed and pulled by supply and demand.
Okay.
And then there are all these different factors that affect how much workers, investors, and landowners earn.
Okay.
And sometimes government policies can have unintended consequences on those earnings.
Yeah. So we shouldn't forget that this is just the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much more to the wealth of nations that we'll get to in later episodes.
Absolutely. We've just scratched the surface here in book one.
Yeah, but this is a foundation.
This is it. This is the groundwork.
This is the basis for everything else. So as you're thinking about all of this, think about, how these fundamental ideas that we've been talking about today, the power of specialization, the way markets set prices, that whole dance between supply and demand. Think about how those things are still shaping our world, our economy today. What do you see that maybe is a new version of those same principles? And what do you think Adam Smith would say if he were here today about all the economic opportunities and challenges that we face? Does this give you a new way to think about all that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these basic ideas, they're so helpful for understanding, what's going on in the economy today.
Yeah.
The debates, the big issues.
Totally. Okay, well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into book one of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. We hope you found it helpful, and we hope it gave you a little bit of a clearer understanding of this really important work.
Absolutely.
All right, catch you all next time.